Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I thought I would share some of the things that I am thinking about nominating for the Hugos this year. So the Hugos are a kind of speculative fiction award that are given out every year at Worldcon. This year the nominations are due, I believe, in late April, so we still have a little bit of time, but I thought I would share what I have read so far that I think I will probably nominate, although there's a couple of other things that I do want to get to, so, you know, I could add more, I could switch out some things. I don't have ideas for every category, but there are some categories where I've read things that I think, yeah, this is good enough for me to nominate. So first, in the novel category, I have 3 books that I've read that I really loved and I would definitely nominate. The first is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, which is something that I think has taken BookTube by storm this year. Super cozy, low-stakes fantasy about an orc who's decided to give up kind of going and adventuring and wants to open up a coffee shop, and kind of creates this found family of other people who help her run this shop, kind of figures out how to run a business and deals with some of the local criminal element as well. It's just really sweet. You really feel for Viv, the orc, and there's also a very gentle sapphic romance that's going on in the background. It's just a joy to read, so I definitely want to nominate this one. I also want to nominate Siren Queen by Ndlovu, which I thought was just fantastic. I do have a standalone review for this, so I'll link it below. It is really atmospheric, this sort of historical fantasy set in the 1930s in the early days of cinema, and follows this Asian American actress who is dealing with all of this kind of magic that is around Hollywood. So this is a type of version of the world where demons exist, and there's all these kinds of deals with demons that people have to make in order to make it very far in Hollywood, and she's just this person who is willing to do whatever it takes to reach stardom. And it's also a very queer book, and it's got a lot of themes of the sort of Me Too movement and of just sort of the way that especially women of color have to deal with roadblocks and all these sorts of things. So it's just very atmospheric, beautifully written, and has awesome themes, so I want to nominate this one. And the third novel that I want to nominate is The Oleander Sword by Tasha Suri. I also have a review for this one, and it was just so much my style. This is the second book in the Burning Kingdom series, which is this epic Indian-inspired fantasy series that has so much political intrigue and such cool magic, and again, great sapphic romance, and it's just so filled with really complicated characters and relationships and dynamics, and it's got this epic scope and such cool magic, and I just love this series. So I really want to nominate this one, even though the first book wasn't on the Hugos last year, so I'm not sure that the second one will be either, but for me it is absolute top, so I want to nominate it. Then in the novella category, I have only one novella that I read that I want to nominate, but I thought it was really cool, which is Uncommon Charm by Emily Bergslien and Kat Weaver. So this is also like a historical fantasy. It is set around in the mid-1920s in England, and it follows a teenage girl whose mother is this really great magician, a little bit distant, but a very powerful woman. And she takes on an apprentice who is sort of a distant cousin, a younger boy. I think he's around 14, and he comes in and starts learning how to control his magic, and the teenage girl and he sort of form a friendship, and they're dealing with a lot of issues of secrets in the family. I thought that this again was super atmospheric. I loved the narrative voice of the teenage girl. She's very snarky, and it's just a lot of fun being in her head. The magic is really interesting. It was just a little info dumpy for me, but other than that, I thought it was so cool. So I would love to see this on the short list for the Hugos. Then for novelettes, I also have just one thing, which was Just Desserts by A.M. Barrie, which was in issue 23 of FIYAH magazine. So this novelette is a historical fantasy. I clearly like historical fantasies quite a lot, set in the time of George Washington, following George Washington's chef, who was an enslaved man. And this chef has some magical abilities that he's able to use when cooking. And this, by the way, is sort of a historical fantasy based off of a real person, but imagining using cooking as a form of resistance. And it is beautifully written. It has all this stuff about food. It was in the food issue of FIYAH magazine. And I just love historical fantasies that have like that political motivation and commentary, and also just really cool writing. So I thought this was fantastic. Then for the short story category, I actually had such a hard time narrowing this down to just 5. So we're limited to 5 nominations in each category. And I actually had so many short stories that I wanted to nominate. In the past year, I have been reading a ton of short story magazines and anthologies, and there's just so many great stories that I want to nominate. So I chose 5 that just really stuck in my head that I think I would like to nominate, but I'm still reading a couple of short story collections. I'm in the middle of Africa Risen, which I'm reading with Angela at Literature Science Alliance and Kristen at Kristen L. SFF Reader. And I'm reading The Best of World SF Volume 2 with Becca at Read Becca, and I'll link all of them below. So I might find more short stories that I want to nominate, but for right now, these are the ones that kind of stuck in my head the most. So first, I have a couple of stories from The Way Spring Arrives, starting with The Stars We Raised by Xinyu, translated from Chinese by Judy Zhou. So this is like a really melancholy, kind of heavy story that I think has a lot of social commentary, that is about a kid who lives in a town where they basically find these little rocks, these stars that they end up kind of raising as pets almost. And it's just about the relationship between this kid and this star that they're raising, and then kind of what happens to that. It is a very kind of dark and heavy but beautiful story that I ended up really loving the atmosphere of. The other story from this collection that I want to nominate is The Mountain and the Secret of Their Names by Wang Nuonuo, translated from Chinese by Rebecca F. Kuang. And this is one that I think did a really cool thing of melding a lot of sci-fi elements with a lot of traditional sort of mythology and practices and spiritual beliefs. The way that this sort of took an idea and melded all of these different beliefs into a very sci-fi story, I thought was such a cool way to, I don't know, build a story. And it just had a lot of kind of emotional connection too that worked for me. Then from Terraform, I really loved the story Nothing Takes the Place of You by Fernando A. Flores, which is such a fascinating, almost horror feeling type story that imagines Selena in the afterlife, sort of all by herself, almost in this sort of deserted version, alternate version of the world, where she wakes up and she's the only one there, and she's wandering around, and there's just, you know, abandoned cars and things like that. And so it's imagining this afterlife for her, and I thought it had, again, excellent atmosphere. It had a lot of kind of commentary as well about Selena and her death, and it just, I really loved the way that this felt and the way that it imagined this afterlife for her, so this one really stuck with me. And then from Africa Risen, I have 2 stories that I'd like to nominate as well, starting with The Soul Would Have No Rainbow by Yvette Lisa Ndlovu. This is a story that I think, I really loved the form of this, and I loved the writing, and I loved the sort of mythology. It's about this woman who is kind of learning about some of the magic that her grandmother had, and learning about the forms of resistance that her grandmother used. It has sort of recipes in this that I thought were really fascinating, and I just loved the politics that were mixed in with the magic in this one. The other story is The Sugar Mill by Tobias S. Buckell, and this was just So fantastic. It has a little bit of dark humor in it, but it also was just filled with a lot of atmosphere and a lot of heart. And it's basically about a guy who is a real estate agent and trying to sell some property on this Caribbean island to some Americans who come after like a hurricane and are interested in buying up cheap property, but the property is an old sugar mill, and his ancestors actually lived and worked on the sugar mill. And as he is there trying to make the sale, he's actually haunted by these ancestors who don't really want him to do that. And the ghosts are very funny, actually. They're, you know, very human in the way that they interact with him, but there's also just so much in this that is questioning issues of colonialism and of exploitation. So it's got great themes and is just really, I thought, excellent writing. And then the last category that I have things to nominate in is the graphic works category. So first in this, I'm going to nominate Across a Field of Starlight by Blue Delaquanti. This is a space opera graphic novel that has really amazing full color illustrations, and it tells this really grand space opera story about two friends. And it is about two people who meet when they're kids, where one of them is a kid within the sort of rebellion group that is fighting against the empire. And the other is a kid who is within a commune of scientists who sort of live a very peaceful science-based life that is totally separate from the empire and the rebellion. And it's about them having this friendship and this pen palship even that they have, and the way that their lives are so different, and really brings up a lot of questions of what are our goals, and when we're fighting against the empire, what's the best way to do that, and what are the things that we sacrifice, and all these sorts of questions. It's also a super queer book, lots of gender nonconformity and lots of transness and lots of questions of access to health and respect and all of these sorts of things. So I loved the social themes that were in this. I loved how queer it was, and I loved just all of these discussions that it was having, as well as the artwork. It does get a little bit dramatic, which is space opera, so you know, that makes sense. But otherwise, I just thought this was super cool. And the other graphic novel that I loved was M is for Monster by Talia Dutton, which is sort of a Frankenstein-inspired story about a woman scientist whose sister ends up dying in an experiment that they were running, and she brings her body back to life, kind of a la Frankenstein. But the person that she brings back doesn't have the memories of her sister, and even though she's trying to kind of regain these memories and these sorts of things, it's not coming, and she ends up being sort of a different person. And so it's about sort of these consequences of exploring things in science, and also about identity, about family expectations. It's got some really great themes. I loved the artwork in this, and I thought it was just incredibly well done. Okay, so those are all of the things that I've read so far that I think I'm going to nominate. If you guys are interested in looking at even more things that are eligible for Hugos this year, Lady Business has a spreadsheet that I will link below, which is just kind of crowdsourced, where people are adding in things that they're thinking of nominating, and they do a little bit of checking to make sure that these things are like actually eligible. So that's a great source to kind of like go and check and see what's available. But yeah, if you guys have loved any of the things that I've loved this year, or if you've read anything else that you think is deserving of a Hugo, I'd love to hear what you're thinking about, what you think deserves an award. Just leave me a comment down below.